I found myself in an interesting position last week when I was in the middle of a conversation with a therapist who was talking to me about sex addiction, and I related to it more than any other episode I have ever done before, which came as a total shock considering I'm not getting laid. But it actually, I think, is so much more relatable to people than just the black and white view of talking about sex addiction. So last week on my podcast, I had an episode that was quite the roller coaster. And it basically came to an end over two people who didn't have the same drives, except one guy, non-diagnosed, but basically had a sex addiction. So every week on my podcast, there's always some kind of like issue that you can dive into and kind of expand upon. And because that was sort of the main reason behind the breakup, I was like, let's have somebody come on to talk about sex addiction.
So there are some times, and because you're better schooled at this than I am, there are some times where I feel celebrities do this sex addiction thing. They don't do it justice because I feel like when they do things that are wrong sexually, then they fall back to I have a sex addiction, and then they go to therapy for it. But it almost sounds like it happens so often with celebrities that I think a lot of people roll their eyes going, no, you're just kind of a dick. And you want sex, and you're using it as sort of a marketing ploy to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, as if it like makes it better. Like, oh, you did all those things, but it's okay because it's a mental health problem and not like, you're kind of skirting accountability because you're pushing it off on your mental health. So it's funny, I asked Dr. Rob Weiss, I guess your long lost therapist brother, about this because I said, what's like the general definition? Like, how do you know like someone has a sex addiction versus someone who just like really loves to fuck? So
it was a serial cheater.
A serial cheater. And he basically said it's like any other addiction. Like people use their addictions to numb whatever's going on in their life. And that can be true for any kind of addiction you have in your life, whether it be alcohol or drugs, where they have somehow equated sex as to something that can sort of soothe whatever is going wrong in their life. But I think what was also really interesting about the way he phrased it was he said, it's only a sex addiction if it impacts your life in a negative way. So I'm like, you can just bang as many people as you want and you can still not categorize it as a sex addiction. He's like, yeah, like if your goal is to be in a monogamous relationship and you find that you can't stay monogamous because you want to get laid that bad, that would put you in the category of being addicted to sex because you have an incongruent relationship with your libido and what you want for your life. And I was like, oh, it's very interesting.
If I'm going to pick an addiction, it's going to be something much easier than that.
Something that takes less effort.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. You got to find somebody that actually wants to do it with you also. So it mentally can be very challenging when you're turned down time and time again.
I knew sex addiction wasn't for me when Eric Benet used that as the reason he cheated on Halle Berry over and over again.
Right.
If that gets you to cheat on Halle Berry, you got a big problem, bro.
Well, that I would say is a sex addiction. There has to be something more going on.
Something.
Yes.
Yeah, we believe
Something's
him.
wrong with you if you're fumbling Halle Berry.
He might be the only one I believe.
Also kind of a flex to be like, yeah, so many people want to have sex with me that it can literally be an addiction.
Right. Most people can get fentanyl, but they can't get sex every single day.
Anybody can go to your local 7-Eleven and get MD-40 or whatever, but not everyone can, be able to not get Halle Berry and also find someone to cheat on.
Actually,
Halle Berry
where would you get fentanyl? If you wanted to get fentanyl today, where would you go?
I don't know where people get regular drugs from. I literally don't know. If I wanted to do drugs tomorrow, I don't know where I would go.
I got a guy that can get me soft drugs, like the easy stuff.
Yeah, me too.
But fentanyl?
Nah, he ain't giving that up.
I wouldn't even know where to go.
What an odd question to ask, though.
You should brought it up.
That is odd, right? Tell on yourself, why don't you?
Know what you're doing this weekend.
Right.
Have fun.
Well, anyway, so
You're trying to get people to slide into your DMs?
No, I don't want it. I'm scared of it. And I don't even know what it does, really.
I'm terrified
not
of it.
good things, apparently. Well, of course, I was going to ask the therapist, like, what are the signs of having a sex addiction other than the obvious, which is, you're having a lot of sex. And he said there are actually some non-sexual signs that may tip you off before you even get that far with someone that could tell you that they could be prone to have the types of characteristics that could lead them to have an addictive personality and possibly even have a sex addiction.
Interesting.
And I'm curious if there was some kind of habit, some kind of non-sexual thing that if you are out on a date with someone, you are having drinks, you are having dinner with someone, a characteristic that you could pinpoint that you think might hone in on the fact that they have a sex addiction or an addictive personality.
I heard someone tell me once it's a sign if a person touches themselves a lot.
Oh.
I don't know how true that is,
Like
but
themselves?
like not like sexually though.
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
you're just kind of
Like this.
always like finding a reason to touch yourself all the time.
Oh.
They say that could be a sign of it.
Now
I've
I'm gonna
read
be
that
self-conscious sitting next to you. He's gonna be like, Abby's over there like
once.
scratching her arm.
Yeah. She's having a moment.
She's having a moment.
I don't know. I think the signs for me would be more like I think. Well, if it's a sex addiction, I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass. I would think that the addiction comes from the power in it and not necessarily the sex itself.
Okay.
So it would be like the ego part of it.
You're kind of on the right track for sure.
Because I think when I was in a real slut phase, that it had everything to do with sort of my dad grooming me in this area when it came to sex, that my manhood was attached to how many women I could have sex with. And if I wasn't having sex with a lot of women, then I wasn't a man.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That makes sense.
And then there's ego attached to it also, that it wasn't even the act itself, like, oh, this feels so good. It was more like a ha-ha. It feels intoxicating to be able to have sex because somebody accepted you, right?
Yep.
And was open to giving you something that is a pretty important thing.
Okay.
Right?
I feel like maybe emotional detachment, like not making making light of what would typically other people would consider serious topics or subject matters.
I would say you're probably the closest. Like if I could combine Kristen and Bert's answers, you would come on to narcissism. So narcissists can are more prone to have these kinds of behaviors because they are detached from the consequences. Like they can have these behaviors and not think about how it's affecting the other person because of their narcissistic traits. So the way that Dr. Rob Weiss described how you can start to pinpoint whether or not somebody is showing narcissistic traits on a date is whether or not they ask questions about you. So if you're like in this date and you feel like you're interviewing them and they're never asking you about them, or they're never asking you about yourself, it's because they just genuinely don't care. And that can tip you off to the fact that they may not care about how you feel in other areas of your relationship, which I thought was very interesting. I was going back, I'm like, how many dates have I been on where I feel like I've interviewed the other person?
So it's not even off-putting. It could be a big-time red flag that they could have a sex addiction.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have a sex addiction, but you could be dealing with a narcissist, which would open you up to the possibilities in the realm that they could be willing to treat you in that way.
So is he saying like not all narcissists are sex addicts, but all
Yes.
sex addicts are narcissists?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
Which was really interesting. And then he, of course, like it was an hour-long conversation, so he didn't just talk about sex addiction, but he basically said like the reason why people treat you this way is they only have the tools that they were given when they were growing up to know how to treat other people. So if growing up they were treated a certain way where like their feelings weren't taken into consideration, like that's all they know. And so they kind of become that person that maybe they were raised by or whoever their caretaker was. And I feel like that strikes a chord with a lot of people because you can look at your failed relationships and realize, oh, that person was experiencing me in that way because I only know how to treat people this way because that's how I was treated as a kid.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow, I should hire you as my therapist, but you're here for free. So this is great.
And you don't need a therapist. You have ChatGPT now.
Yeah,
So you don't need
exactly.
all that. Interesting. So what's the name of not the podcast, but the episode?
The podcast is The Breakup Breakdown on your podcast network, Pioneer. And then I actually can't remember the episode title name, but it is one of the most recent episodes. So if you're listening to this in real time, as it comes out, it came out like a week ago
Interesting.
with Dr. Rob Weiss.
The Bert Show.